Hi, I'm Stefan, the BMW DIY guy, and I want to show you how you can easily change and upgrade the low pressure fuel pump in your BMW. Alright, so let's talk about this project a little bit before we do it, because you could use these same instructions if you're just looking to change the low pressure fuel pump in your BMW. But in this case, we're actually going to be doing an upgrade from Precision Raceworks. Now, if you're looking to tune and increase the horsepower in your car and you make all kinds of changes like bigger turbo and bigger high pressure fuel pump and all those different changes, one of the most neglected things that most of us miss is the low pressure fuel pump. Now, this is especially if you're running E85 as well. So I highly recommend that if you've changed your turbos or you're running E85, you're running port injection, you're looking at all these different options, you really should be looking to upgrade your low pressure fuel pump. And the new Stage 3 brushless low pressure fuel pump from Precision Raceworks is exactly the thing to do it. Now, this isn't very hard. You just want to be careful as you go through it. Now remember, all of the parts and tools and torque values and everything you need will be listed in the video description below. So if you have any questions, make sure to check that out. But I'm going to walk you through this whole thing step by step. This really isn't all that hard. Really, the only complication in this is you're going to be dealing with your fuel tank and with some fuel. So we're going to be careful while we do this. One of the very first things we want to do, though, is actually get into the back seat and take our back seat out. So let's go ahead and start there. All right, y'all, so I'm going to be using my M2 Competition in this case, but really these instructions are going to work for any F series and almost any E series as well, because BMW hasn't changed all that much. The only real differences you're going to see is changes in a little bit in the collar over here on the fuel pump and then also in the fuel pump itself, but it's going to be essentially the same. Now, you have to take your back seat out because the fuel pump is here on the passenger side. You just take your back seat out by just popping this up, and then you can pull this out. Now, keep in mind if you have heated seats, which I don't, you're going to have an extra wire here, so as you pull this out, you're going to want to reach and go ahead and unplug the cable for your heated seats. I don't have that, so then you can just take the whole seat base and take it and feed it out of the car. Now there's going to be a couple of additional steps that we're going to have on my car, and I highly suggest on some of these things that you do the same. So we've got this carpet matting that you can just take it and peel back. You can just take it and just kind of fold it back into place, tuck it back into the seat base here, and it should be able to stay okay. Now, your fuel pump is on this side, and I'm going to rearrange my camera head a little bit, but I'm going to have two additional steps here that you may not have, but again, I highly suggest it. So first of all, you can see all my sound skins matting that I have down here. It makes a huge difference. Please make sure to check that out. And then we'll also have the M3 flex fuel sensor that's in here as well. Now, if you've got sound skins like I do, I've already cut out a disc here that I'm going to pull off from my fuel pump. So I'm going to rearrange my camera a little bit to give you a better angle. And then we're going to be taking the lid off the fuel pump itself. All right, so if you have followed my sound skins video, which I highly recommend, basically what you do is you just cut a disc out around this top door or this top cover for your fuel pump, and you can take this disc and peel it off and set it aside. Now, in addition, we're going to have one extra step here, as you can probably see from the additional cable, of when we get to our M3 flex fuel sensor, which is really awesome, and is one of the reasons why I'm doing this, is to make sure that I've got good E85 support as I do this work. So we're going to be taking that off as well. If you don't have that, you can obviously skip right past that step. But you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 millimeter little plastic nuts. Now you can also notice that on the cover there's an arrow pointing here towards the front of the car. This is the back, this is the front of the car. So it's really easy to put this back on. Okay, but then you can just take off these plastic nuts all the way around and then lift off the cover. Then, like I said, we've got the M3 sensor we're going to have to take off. So as we ease this back, you're going to see I've got this additional piece here. But one of the very first things you want to do, whether you've got the sensor or not, is go ahead and unplug right there by lifting the tab and unplug the whole assembly. Now, what you want to do is actually go ahead and get out of the car, open your gas door, take your gas cap off, and go ahead and try to start your car. Because when you look at your fuel line, which in this case, this blue fuel line would normally be plugged into the top of the pump right here, right? But we've got the sensor. So this is a charged line full of fuel. So you're going to want to open your gas cap, try to start your car to drain this fuel line so you have as little fuel in here as possible to make as little of a mess. Okay, so go ahead and do that next. If you went ahead and you started your motor, it should probably run for a few seconds, and then it'll cut off. You might get an error on your display saying that you've got a fuel problem, which only makes sense because you just unplugged the fuel pump, okay? Now, if you don't have this sensor, then I'll talk about how to take the OEM line off, but I highly recommend it. This is a perfect time to do the install on both. This will require a few extra steps. Obviously, I'm not going to cover today. You can check out my video on how to install the sensor. I highly, highly recommend it. But if you have the OEM line, there's this little white collar that you're going to push back on. And that collar should pop open. Hopefully you heard a little click, and then you can pull it up and away. Now, you're going to have a rag handy. Make sure that your car's open. I've got my sunroof open. Both doors are open to vent out any fuel. In this case, this plug that comes with this sensor, you depress on both sides and then work it up, and you should get very little fuel spill. But you will get just a little. Like I said, just have a rag handy to go ahead and soak all that up. Okay, so at this point, this is all unplugged and up and out of the way. Now, if you do have the sensor, it is in the way a little bit. You don't want to beat up on your fuel line here too badly. So we're going to do our best to kind of work our way around this sensor and pull it up out of the way, because we're going to be taking the collar off next. All right, y'all, now that we've got the back seat out, let's talk about the pump a little bit before we actually get into it, because some of these things are going to be easier to show you outside of the car and on the new pump than when we're actually doing it live on the pump that's in the car. So this will help all of this make sense as you kind of orient yourself to what this pump looks like. Now, this is the new pump. It looks almost exactly the same from the outside. It has an identical bucket. It just has a significantly upgraded pump. So a couple of things. Now, first of all, when we're reinstalling the pump, I'm going to talk a little bit about how it's kind of spring loaded when you're pressing this top collar back in. That's because of this spring assembly right here that presses it down into place and keeps it in the bottom of the tank. Now, in addition, as when we take the old pump out, there's a connection here at the bottom that we're going to have to kind of unhook and pull out, and that is a secondary fuel line that runs up and over the top of your fuel tank. But this is what that connection looks like as we turn it. And we're going to be using a pick tool on a little pick on this side to take it and pull it out. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. Now, in addition, when we look at the bottom right here, one of the very first things we're going to do, we're going to be taking the collar off the top of the fuel pump. And when this top part comes out, we're going to be unplugging an electrical line right here. And we're going to use a pick tool and pull a plug out, but it's right here, and we'll feed it out through the hoses. Okay? But all of that, just so you get a little bit better orientation, because when you're pulling the pump out, you're going to have that combination of trying to work with the pump and unplug these things, and you're dealing with fuel. So hopefully you have relatively low fuel in your tank. Sadly, I've got a full fuel tank. I should have thought about this a little bit, but I've got a full fuel tank. So I'm gonna be dealing with a pump that's wet as it comes out, plus the fuel right there. So I'm gonna be really careful as I'm doing this, but I wanted to make sure you got a good picture of what all these pieces look like until we get in it, okay? So now, let's jump back in the car. Okay, y'all, so we are at the stage where we're going to want to take the collar off. So when we do all of this, you want to move relatively quickly, because once you take the collar off and you take the pump itself out, keep in mind the pump is going to be wet, and we're going to walk through the process of lifting it up and out and unplugging not only that electrical connection we talked about, but the line that's at the bottom of the pump that I showed earlier. I'm definitely going to be wearing gloves during that stage. So you want to be careful as you do that. So go ahead and lay out some rags. I've already put some out. And also a clean path to get this pump out of the car, because it is going to be wet and I don't want to get gasoline into my carpet if I can help it. So go ahead and lay out some rags to be ready for that transition. Also, your tank is going to be open, of course, at that point. If you have a full tank like mine, you're going to get some gas exposure. So you got to move quickly as we go through all these steps to get this one out and the new one in. Now, taking the collar off takes a specialized tool. There's some really ugly ways you could do it with like a screwdriver and a hammer. I highly don't recommend that when you can get something like this for so little, and this will be linked in the video description. You can see it's got 3 sides, and it fits down into teeth, these cutouts actually on the collar itself. So you just take it and fit it down into place, and you can see where it's now locked in. So I'm going to use an extension and a breaker bar to crank this thing open. So let me go ahead and crack this collar open. We'll take the collar off, and then I'm going to show you about taking the pump out using a pick tool to unplug that one electrical connection and work off the connection at the bottom, and then take the pump out. All right, so now that the collar's off, you can see that there's a notch to the front. And there really is only one way this pump can go in, but just note that that notch is to the front. Now it's going to be down pretty solidly, so you're going to have to work at it a little bit. If you have to, you can use a screwdriver to pry it up, but it should come up and loose. And again, keep in mind as you do this, you're going to get more and more fuel exposure as you work through this. So just work the pump, and you've got hoses. Remember those hoses on one side? They're going to want to hang up as we get through this. So as we slowly work our way out here, again, this is where gloves are going to be really, really important as we work this process up. Now, remember that one plug here on this side, and it's a little hard to see right now, but this is why we demonstrated on the earlier, on the upgraded pump. So you can see where there's the plug right here. You're going to want to reach in, and I'm going to get my head in the way of the camera. You're going to want to reach in and unplug that, and then we're going to continue to work the pump up and out till we can get to that lower connection right at the bottom. Okay, so want to work your way in here, take a look at it, and just work that plug out. Now there's a little locking tab on one side that you're going to want to use a pick tool to just depress the little tab in the plug itself, and then the plug will come out. Okay? Make sure to not drop anything into your tank as you do this. Okay, so go ahead and get this plug out, and then I'll show you about how to undo the connection underneath. Okay, so the pump is out now with the exception of that lower connection that I mentioned before, right? So it's almost out entirely. So this is where you want to take it and rock that connection down. You have to reach in a little bit and just rock that connection down. It rotates down and pulls out. Okay, so we'll just keep slowly working the pump out here, just like that. Now the pump is almost entirely out, as you can see now. Okay, so one quick tip here. So I move the float up out of the way. There's a little locking tab right here. So as you rotate it, so it's in the 12 o'clock position in the install position. You rotate it to about 3 o'clock or so, 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. Then you depress a little tab, and then that hose will come loose. And again, as you transition this, be very, very careful as you transition it. It's full of fuel, or it still has fuel on it, so I'm going to take it out of the car. Okay, so here we are with the new pump, as you can see, and you're just going to reverse the same process that you did taking it out. So you're going to want to take this secondary feed hose, put it in at about, again, that kind of 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock angle, put it in, and as you put it into the tank, snap it into an upright position. Okay, don't forget that feed line that's going to come all the way up between the hoses and plug back in this location right here. Okay, so get that as well. So as we take this, we just feed it back into place. We're gonna pull the float out of the way a little bit. Take it, press it past that locking tab we talked about earlier, just like that. You heard a snap. And then I'm gonna turn it up into that kind of 12 o'clock position as we go. Now, as you feed all this back in, I'm gonna get some of my rags out of the way here. Again, be careful with the level float. And I probably could have unplugged my sensor here to give myself a little bit more room, because I'm definitely dealing with some tight space. But now all you need to do is just work to fit it back into the tank itself. So you're just going to keep turning, be very gentle with this as you go, feed it down and into the tank. Before you drop it all the way in, don't forget to plug that cable back in up here at the top. All right, so one thing you can do to potentially make this easier is that if the hose is tipped up in the 12 o'clock position, it can really jam you up putting this back in. So I tipped it back down to that 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock position, and it helped me get it past the float and get the body of the pump in. But keep in mind, it's still not in that up locked position. So I'm gonna reach in very carefully now that it's in the tank and just pull that hose back up into that 12 o'clock position. You can do it with a tool, or you can get your finger in there as well, just to help crank it around. So that'll help get it back in the right position. So continue to fit the pump down into place. Remember that this toothed part goes right in front, and it's also spring loaded, as we talked about earlier. So once you get it down, you're gonna have to compress this down to put the collar back on. All right, so once you have that hose in the right orientation, it's just a matter of just fitting all of these components back in. Make sure that your plug that you pulled out is in. Feed these hoses, the rest of the hoses, the feed lines back in very carefully.
Do your best not to splash any fuel around, and just be patient as you work it down into place. It's a very tight fit, as you can tell. Okay, so now it's in entirely. So you can see it's going to fit in and down, and it's going to fit right where that gasket sits, right there with that notch right there in front. And see, it's kind of spring loaded, so you're going to have to hold it in place. So go ahead and get your locking ring again. You're going to just take that and we're going to fit it back into place. Now, I went ahead and pulled my boot mount sensor off for now, just to give myself a little bit more room as I work my way through this. But as you can see, just fit that back down, and even just kind of finger tight enough to get it to hold that down. So then go ahead and take your locking tool, put it back in place and snap it back in. It really will snap back in over these ridges, so you don't have to worry about torque values or anything like that. But this will also start to cut down on the fuel smell as well. But go ahead and get that all locked back down, and then we're going to start putting it all back together. All right, so the new pump's in and all good to go. Just be careful with spilling fuel as you go here. If you do have the sensor like I do, there is fuel in the sensor. So just snap everything back together as we go through to try to keep fuel spills down to a minimum as we go. All right. So I'm going to put this all back together, snap it all back in. If you don't have the sensor, you'd be plugging the blue line directly into the feed right here. So go ahead and pull that cap and then just snap your fuel line back onto it. And there should be good pops as you do this, whether you're using the OEM line or the Boot M3 line off the flex fuel sensor. But that's all good to go. Now, if you do have any fuel spilled or anything else like that, this is a good time to clean that up. Get any rags out that have fuel on them so they don't soak into your carpet or anything like that. And then we're gonna walk through just buttoning up the rest. All right, so everything's all plugged back in. And actually, I'm gonna take a few minutes here off camera to give any fuel that I've spilled time to evaporate. So I had a little bit that came out of my sensor that spilled into here. And what I don't wanna have happen, and I've wiped it down the best I can, but what I don't want to have happen is have it sitting here and smell fuel in my cabin. So I'm gonna take 5 or 10 minutes, wander off. So give any exposed fuel in here a chance to go ahead and evaporate. You might want to do the same if you've had it spill at all, but just make sure that this is nice and clean before you button it back up. Now, when you do, it's very simple. You're just going to take, obviously I've used my seatbelt to keep the lid from getting in my way. So go ahead and just snap the plug back in. It's got the same rocker switch, so it should just clip as it goes in. The arrow goes to the front when you put this back into place, just like that. All right, so now that your fuel pump is plugged back in, you can go ahead and start the car. Now, this is a good time to call out that actually, when I installed my Boot M3 flex fuel sensor, I didn't get any errors out of the car whatsoever. Now in this case, I actually do have an error that I've got a fuel problem, which doesn't surprise me too much. Now, if that error doesn't go away or this check engine light stays once I fire the car back up, there's a whole bunch of tools you can use to actually clear that error. You can use BIMR code, you can use Boot M3 if you're actually running it to scan and clear all of your codes. But just in case you get that, don't be surprised. I didn't in one case and now I just did. But now is the time where you go ahead and fire your car up. So, in my case, it might be a little bit loud. It's on, everything's plugged in. All right, now that you fired the car up and it's running successfully, you just want to double check. Make sure that you don't have any leaks in any kind, so go ahead and look at all it around, which is why I left the cover open until we've actually started the car and ran a test. So everything is dry and looks good, ran really well, idled well. So go ahead and button this all back up. So all you have to do is put this lid back on, and it's those 5 plastic nuts all the way around. And then as far as putting the back seat in, I'll show you that in just a second, but it's just gonna be the reverse order. All right, so getting the seat base in is very, very simple. In my case, I only have 2 seatbelt pulls, so I'll feed them through, tip the seat base in, and snap it down into place. If you're struggling with the seat belts, you can always feed these through, snap them into place to help you pull that lock back through the seat base. So other than that, as you can see, it's in. At this point, it's all done. All right, also go ahead and clean up and put your tools away. And you can tell this really isn't a hard project and only takes a few simple tools that I will have listed in the description below. So if you don't have them, this is where you can get them. So thank you so much to Precision Raceworks for making such a fantastic product. This really is a plug and play style upgrade, but it can make a huge difference
If you really are going down the upgrade path like a stage 1 or stage 2 or custom tunes or especially E85 and other setups like that, making sure that your fuel pump can handle that increased load is very, very important. And Precision Raceworks makes a fantastic plug and play product. So thank you so much to them for making such a fantastic product that's so easy to work with, and I highly recommend them. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please click subscribe and the little alarm bell. It makes a huge difference to my channel, and I have a ton of content coming that I can't wait to bring to you. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on my next video.